Hello and welcome back once again to the Word for the Week. We're in a noisy environment here, we're in a livestock market, and today we are looking at the assumption that fear is a bad thing. This arises because in our little series at the moment on return to the Lord, I've kept on coming up against an expression, the fear of the Lord. Now, in the Bible, that's often portrayed as a good thing, the fear of God. And I certainly remember my father threatening me from time to time that he's going to put the fear of God into me. And that was probably for my benefit. In a place like this, where there are real and evident dangers to be found, you'd want a child to be coming into a place like this if they were coming in with a certain apprehension to keep them away from danger and out of trouble. In fact, they shouldn't be in a place as dangerous as this at all, and it might be an incentive to them to get out of where they shouldn't be. But we know very well the assumption that fear is a bad thing in psychology and sociology and sometimes in ethics stems from how fear is typically experienced, its effects on human behaviour arising out of bad relationships. So let's get out of this noise and this fuss here at the moment. Get inside and look at this assumption that fear is bad from a psychological point of view, from a sociological point of view, from an ethical point of view, and see how that impacts how we instinctively react when we hear the Bible talking about the fear of the Lord. And then look again at what Scripture's got to say about that in Proverbs chapter 3. So from a psychologist's perspective, I guess, there's quite a lot of emphasis on the negative impacts of fear on human beings. Emotional distress that's caused by it can be quite paralyzing. Fear is often associated with anxiety and stress, an inability to act in a constructive way. You freeze up. Chronic fear can undoubtedly lead to mental health issues like phobias and depression, or PTSD, as they call it. So someone living there in fear of failure could just lock up and avoid challenges altogether, and well, you get an impairment of judgment and rational decision making and exaggerated perceptions of danger or avoidance behaviors associated with that. Now, obviously psychology is aware that fear is not inherently bad. It can be useful in particular situations. It might, as we were saying about the situation in a livestock market, it might alert you to physical threat and get you to fly or fight or whatever it is that's appropriate to the situation. It's been useful like that in the past. But fear-driven behaviors, they say, are often less sustainable. They say can undermine your own competence, certain elements of well-being. Now, when the sociologist comes along and looks at the issue of fear, the sociologist might say that there's a danger of manipulation. Fear is often used by systems of power to control individuals or groups, propaganda, oppressive laws, coercion of one sort and another. And that gets compliance, but it erodes freedom and certainly erodes trust, and it can break. You can end up with authoritarian regimes using fear to suppress dissent, or setting up social situations where social cohesion goes because of the fear, breeding suspicion and division, hostility within communities. And then fear of outsiders can lead to xenophobia, racism, damaging relationships between groups and fostering social fragmentation. And then the ethicists in the field of ethics, they talk about dehumanization. Fear can lead to behavior that dehumanizes other people. You get prejudice, you get scapegoating, you get violence in social or family situations. Fear-based ethics, focusing on self-preservation rather than well-being of others, or on my desires being fulfilled rather than the needs of others, it contradicts moral ideas like compassion and justice and fairness. So when can fear be good? Well, your average psychologist is going to say that perhaps it can be good if fear alerts an individual to danger and promotes survival, avoiding risky behaviours. A sociologist might say that fear can foster social responsibility when it's tied to an awareness of consequences. Environmental fear motivating conservation activity, and so on. And an ethicist might say a healthy fear of authority or consequences can encourage accountability and responsibility for others and deter harm. So in summary, I guess, in the secular world, the assumption that fear is bad is based on its association with control and paralysis and dehumanization in psychology and sociology and in ethics. But there is a recognition, even in the secular world, the world without God, that fear has a value that depends on its context and on its function and the relationship in which it occurs and which it fosters. When fear fosters wisdom, humility, self-preservation, it can be constructive, and that's acknowledged. Yet as a chronic factor, a chronic motivator, a fear undermines some measure of personal autonomy and moral agency. And there's the problem. It's down to the relationship and where that relationship is going. So on that basis then, let's look at our text today. It's Proverbs 3:7. It says this: "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil." Now the context here is pretty clear to start with. The previous two verses are all about not trusting entirely to your own judgment as to how to live the well-blessed life God intends for his human creation in the world he's made. It says this, it says, just in the two verses before, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make straight your paths." So there's the point. There's the plan in this context. It's for your benefit and comes from a relationship where someone is longing to do you good. But yet, Proverbs 3:7 is clearly calling on human beings to fear the Lord. But what does it mean by that? What's that about? Well, if we look initially at the Hebrew text, the Hebrew word yareh is rich in meaning. And whilst it's often translated as fear, rightly so, that word can convey much more nuanced ideas and concepts, especially in contexts like Proverbs 3:7, which says, "Do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and shun evil." So there are other areas of meaning within that same word you've got to consider for that context. It can mean reverence in certain contexts, a deep respect and awe for God, recognizing his majesty and his holiness, not a craven fear, but a reverence for God. And that expresses a heart posture of honor and submission without connotations of terror, because God is an awesome God. That word yareh, again, it can mean simply awe, a sense of wonder, profound respect for God's greatness. It shows humility and admiration rather than trembling fear. It's not in that league at all. It's not in that area of meaning. It means more devotion, and the word is sometimes translated devotion, emphasizing wholehearted commitment to God, where fearing the Lord is understood as realizing his greatness and aligning your life with his will in love and in faithfulness, and in that mutual relationship of love and faithfulness arising from heartfelt respect and devotion. In other contexts, it can be translated as some recognition or acknowledgement of God's sovereignty. Recognize or acknowledge, ways you can translate that in certain contexts. Emphasizing awareness of who God is and acting accordingly. It comes down to trustful obedience. In the context of the wisdom literature in the Old Testament, yareh often implies a healthy relationship with God, marked by trust and willing submission to his authority. You see, it is the nature of the relationship and the truth of the things that are being respected that makes it healthy and wholesome and not pathological. And frequently throughout the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 1:7, for example, the fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom, it says. It doesn't imply a servile terror. It reflects a relational attitude that acknowledges God's greatness and responds to that with humility and submission and worship. And that understanding aligns with other uses of yareh in the Hebrew Bible, where it describes proper human responses to God's actual power and presence. So bringing that understanding of the Hebrew text into our consideration then, what is the argument for translating this word yareh as awe here? Well, the argument for translations of yareh as reverence or awe, similar terms instead of fear in Proverbs 3:7, rests on contextual, linguistic, and theological considerations. What sort of considerations? Well, first of all, the broader context of the book of Proverbs. The overarching theme of Proverbs is to impart wisdom for living a godly and a moral life. Proverbs 1 starts off reminding us that, chapter 1, verses 2 through 7. The fear of the Lord is foundational to wisdom, says Proverbs 1:7. But this fear is not about terror. It's about a life orientated toward God in humility and obedience, a godly life. So terms like fear are not appropriate in that context, but reverence or awe capture the positive relational aspect far better than to use the word fear. And in the context of the book of Proverbs, the word yareh is used with positive associations. Fear in the Lord leads to life, to security, to blessings. You can read about that in Proverbs 14 and Proverbs 19. So translating it as fear in the sense of terror might misrepresent that constructive and beneficial background. And then there's the broader linguistic background to the word yareh itself. The range of meaning of yareh, it has a semantic range that includes fear, awe, reverence, and respect. All of those things. The exact meaning of the word is then context dependent, both, of course, in a book where it's used and in the immediate context of the verses round about. So whilst yareh can be translated fear because it implies terror in that context, it can also mean the healthy respect, as in respecting the authority of a parent or a king. Interestingly, in other passages, Exodus 20, verse 20, Moses tells the Israelites, he says this, don't be afraid. Well, that's a negative thing, isn't it? God has come to you to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. And that's a positive use of the word. Two forms of yareh are used there in the same sentence. The first refers to terror, and the context tells us that. And they're told to avoid that terror. Don't be afraid. And the second refers to a reverential fear or awe that motivates a godly life. A healthy fear of the Lord in the Bible serves several key purposes, not merely an emotional reaction, but a profound relational attitude that shapes a person's life, priorities, and actions. Let's have a look at the primary uses or functions, purposes of this. What is the purpose and use of this constructive awe and reverence rather than terrorized fear in the Bible? Well, firstly, it's said to be, and we've referred to this, the foundation of wisdom and knowledge. Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So there in Proverbs 1, a healthy fear of the Lord provides the foundation for true wisdom and for true understanding, which is a good thing. It acknowledges there that all knowledge begins with recognizing God's authority and character and the awe that goes with him, so that we revere him. So Job 28:28, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. See, true wisdom involves reverence for God, and that leads you into moral and spiritual insight. More than leading you into insight, it gives you moral guidance and avoidance of sin as a result. Proverbs 16:6. Through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. Through the fear of the Lord, evil is avoided. See, a reverential fear, an awe, a respect, a reverence, motivates ethical living, keeping believers away from self-destructive sin and societal damage being done by wrongdoing. And of course, we've already mentioned that famous verse in Exodus 20, verse 20. Do not be afraid, God has come to test you, so that the fear of the Lord will be with you, to keep you from sinning, to keep you from sinning. So here Moses is clarifying the fear of the Lord isn't about terror, but it's about maintaining a healthy respect for God's holiness, leading to improved behavior, to obedience, to all the strictures of the law on the way we relate to one another in society, as well as helping us in terms of relating to God himself. Another good purpose of this fear here is to encourage humility and dependence on God. So, our text, for example, says, Proverbs 3:7, do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and shun evil. That will be the effect of it. Society will be a better place if there's a healthy fear of God in it, because evil will be shunned. Yes, it humbles believers not to be so arrogant as just to assert their own wants and will all the way down the road. Reminds us of our dependence on God rather than our own understanding, and society ends up being in a different and a better place. So, Isaiah 66, verse 2, these are the ones I look on with favour, those who are humble and contrite in spirit, and who tremble at my word. It has that restricting and controlling effect on the excesses of human behaviour. And where does it lead? It leads on to life and safety and blessings. Proverbs 19, verse 23, the fear of the Lord leads to life, and then one rests content, untouched by trouble. Reverence for God results in spiritual and practical well-being, offering a sense of safety and peace. So Psalm 112 says, blessed are those who fear the Lord. Blessed are those who fear the Lord, who find great delight in his commands. See, this is the product. This is not a craven fear that crushes the human spirit. The fear of the Lord is a source of joy and blessings for those who live in harmony with God's will because they stand in awe of God, respect and reverence him. This fear of the Lord then leads to safety, life, blessing, and fosters worship and awe. And again, we know from the psychologists and their research that people who have that life of worship tend to have better emotional life, better mental health, as we say these days. It fosters awe and worship. Psalm 33, let all the earth fear the Lord, let all the people of the world revere him. And it leads to that worship which follows. Healthy fear leads to awe-filled worship, recognizing God's greatness, his sovereignty and his majesty. So in Revelation 15:4, in the worship of heaven, who will not fear you, Lord, and bring glory to your name? For you alone are holy. Even in eternity, fear of the Lord inspires worship, rooted in recognizing his holiness and his worthiness. Whilst here below, way back in Deuteronomy 10, now Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you? But to fear the Lord your God, in the reverence sense, you see. To walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to observe the Lord's commands and decrees that I am giving you today for your own good. Fear of the Lord strengthens that covenant bond by fostering love and obedience and service to God when we see it not as so often we take the English word fear, craven fear, limiting, but as putting us in a right covenant relationship with the one we know is awesome, we know is to be revered, the one we know is holy. And it builds that respect for him that leads to living in a proper covenant relationship with him, which is wholesome and holy and good for us. And that should inspire confidence and trust in God as we live our lives in a perilous sort of world. Proverbs 14:26 says, whoever fears the Lord has a secure fortress, and for their children it will be a refuge. Okay, so when Proverbs 3:7 tells us, "Do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and shun evil," the context there is pretty clear to start with in the text. But when we take that on through Scripture, we realize that there is something here that is healthy and good and a source of blessing for us, because it means to revere and to stand in awe and to show a massive respect for one who is worthy and deserving of that. In the context where when we do that, it is good for us, for our psychological health, for our sociological situation, and for the whole of our life. Our relationships are enriched. A healthy fear of the Lord functions as the foundation for wisdom and knowledge. We've looked at that. It gives moral guidance, helping us to avoid sin that we'd otherwise just run quite easily into, and which would cause damage to our relationships and to the world we live in. It gives us an anchor for humility, dependence, and faith in God. An anchor for humility and dependence, a source of life, blessing, and peace. It brings us into that healthy, worshipping relationship with God that others are telling us gives resilience and strength and the ability to persevere to human beings. It's a sustaining force in covenant relationships with God and with those he puts us into covenant relationships with in a healthy way in our society, husbands, wives, and so on and so on. And it provides us with a basis for confidence to live our lives as we trust in him, because we understand how great and awesome our God is, the one whom we revere and who turns out to be a source of strength and help to us in our daily existence. Now, let's not get this wrong. Fear can be very harmful in our lives, in our minds, in our relationships, and it can be considered harmful to healthy relationships, whether personal, social, or spiritual. But that's down to things that are wrong in those relationships. That's down to a bad sort of fear, not the awe and the reverence and the respect and the desire to love and serve and to obey that Proverbs is talking about here in Proverbs 3:7. And it is that fear which so frequently in the books and in the verses we'll be looking at as we look at the theme of returning to God, with its productive and helpful outcomes, leading to productive and helpful relationships, that Proverbs 3:7 is talking about when it says, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil." As it were, as if that would be the result. Well, there's my word for the week. I wanted to step away from the word return this time because the concept of this awesome, reverent fear of God keeps coming up in connection with that call, which is an Old Testament call, a crucial one, and becomes a New Testament call to turn to God. And next time, as we look at the prophet Joel, we'll see how that helpfully and wholesomely works out. God bless you. Have a great week, living in the reverent fear, the awestruck fear of the gracious, the kind, the powerful, the mighty God of Proverbs 3.